When my in-laws told me I wasn't good enough for their son, I smiled, nodded, and let the words wash over me like they didn't sting. But inside, I was burning. They thought they knew who I was: ordinary, unremarkable, someone their son had settled for. What they didn't know was that I was already planning something that would make them choke on their words. And when the time came, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old, married to the love of my life, Daniel. We met in college, where I was a scholarship student working 2 part-time jobs, and he came from a family with money, old money, the kind that makes people think they're better than everyone else. From the beginning, his parents, Richard and Margaret, looked at me like I was a stain on their perfect picture. His sister, Victoria, wasn't any better. She always called me that girl instead of my name, like I wasn't even worth acknowledging. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Daniel loved me, and that was enough. I convinced myself that once they got to know me, they'd see I wasn't after their money, that I genuinely cared for their son. I thought kindness and patience could melt their icy judgment. But I was wrong. The first time I went to dinner at their estate, because of course they didn't just have a house, they had an estate, I wore my best dress. It wasn't designer, but it was neat, tasteful, and I felt beautiful in it. The moment I stepped into the dining room, I caught the way Margaret's eyes flicked over me, lingering on the tagless dress, and then the smirk she shared with Victoria. "Daniel, darling," Margaret said as she poured wine into crystal glasses, "you could have anyone. And you chose this?" I froze, my cheeks flushing, but Daniel snapped back, "Mom, that's enough." I forced a smile, pretending I didn't hear. That night, on the drive home, I told him, "It's fine, maybe she just doesn't know me yet." But she knew exactly what she was doing. It only got worse from there. Whenever I visited, Margaret found ways to jab at me. She'd accidentally bring up how much Daniel's ex-girlfriend had achieved, always at my expense. "Do you remember Emily, darling?" she'd say, looking straight at me as she addressed Daniel. "She's a lawyer now. Such a shame you two didn't work out." I'd bite the inside of my cheek and sip my water, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Victoria was worse. She was my age, but she lived off her parents' money like it was her birthright. Every time she saw me, she made comments dripping with condescension. "Oh, Emma," she'd say, tilting her head, "that dress is cute. Did you get it on sale?" I love when people make the most of limited options. And then there was Richard, Daniel's father. He was quieter, but his silence carried its own weight. He never looked at me directly, never addressed me in conversation. If I said something, he'd pretend not to hear. The only time he acknowledged me was once, when he leaned back in his leather chair and muttered, "She'll drag you down, son. Just wait." I smiled when Daniel told me about it later, but inside, I felt like I was slowly suffocating. The worst came the night of Daniel's big promotion dinner. He'd been working so hard, and finally, he was recognized with a director role at his firm. I planned to beam with pride, to stand by his side and celebrate. But his mother had other plans. The room was filled with family, friends, even Daniel's colleagues. Everyone clinked their glasses, ready for a toast. Margaret stood, holding her wine aloft, her pearl necklace gleaming under the chandelier. "To Daniel," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "for achieving greatness despite the many setbacks along the way." Her eyes slid to me, sharp and deliberate. The room chuckled politely, and Victoria covered her smirk with a napkin. My chest tightened, my cheeks burned, and for a moment, I wanted to disappear under the table. I forced myself to laugh softly, pretending I didn't understand, but inside, I was breaking. I could see the confusion in Daniel's eyes, his anger simmering as he looked at his mother, but I squeezed his hand under the table, silently telling him to let it go. That night, when we got home, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor. "Why do they hate me so much?" I whispered. Daniel knelt beside me, taking my hands. "Because they don't know you. Because they refuse to. But I love you, Emma, and that's what matters." I nodded, tears prickling at my eyes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe love was enough. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep living under their constant ridicule. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my dignity, my worth. And if they thought I was going to keep letting them humiliate me while I sat quietly in the corner, they were wrong. I smiled faintly in the darkness that night, a new resolve forming in my heart. They thought I was not good enough. Then I'd show them exactly how wrong they were. The weeks after that promotion dinner were some of the hardest of my life. Outwardly, I kept smiling, kept showing up to family events with Daniel, pretending their little digs didn't bother me. But inside, I was exhausted. Every word from Margaret, every smug glance from Victoria, every cold silence from Richard, it piled up like bricks on my chest. Daniel tried to shield me. He'd argue with them, cut visits short, but I hated watching him stuck between me and his family. I loved him too much to make him choose. Or at least, that's what I told myself while swallowing the pain. But one night, I caught myself staring in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the woman looking back. My eyes, once bright with hope, were tired, my smile looked rehearsed, and my shoulders sagged under a weight that wasn't mine to carry. That was when I decided, enough was enough. If his family thought I was beneath them, if they thought I wasn't good enough for their son, I'd let them choke on the truth. But not with words, no, I knew better than to argue with people like them. I'd show them. And when I do, there would be no room for denial. I started planning quietly, carefully. At work, I had recently landed a big project that put me in the spotlight. I'm an architect, and after years of working long hours and pushing myself harder than anyone expected, I finally secured a deal to design a community center for the city. It was a multi-million-dollar project, the kind of achievement people wait their entire careers for, but I hadn't told anyone in Daniel's family. Why would I? They had already decided who I was in their heads, the girl from nothing who married into money. I knew the groundbreaking ceremony was coming up soon, and as luck would have it, Margaret herself was planning a big anniversary party that same weekend. They'd rented a luxury hall, invited the entire extended family, plus half of Daniel's father's business associates. I saw an opportunity. At first, I doubted myself. Maybe I should just let it go, I whispered to Daniel one night as he held me close. He kissed my forehead. Emma, you've worked too hard to hide who you are. If they can't respect you, then they don't deserve to know you. But, maybe it's time you let them see. That was all the encouragement I needed. I spent the next few weeks preparing quietly, while Margaret and Victoria obsessed over the guest list, the catering, the decorations for their grand party. I poured myself into polishing every detail of my project presentation. I made sure my speech was clear, strong, and humble but powerful enough to leave no doubt about what I had achieved. The night of the party finally came. I slipped into my evening gown, a sleek, elegant dress I had saved for months to buy. Not because it was designer, but because when I looked in the mirror, I felt radiant, strong, like myself again. When we arrived, the room was buzzing with chatter and laughter. The chandeliers sparkled, champagne glasses clinked, and everywhere I turned, people were dressed in their finest. Margaret swept across the floor in pearls, kissing cheeks and exchanging air hugs. Richard shook hands, his voice booming with authority. Victoria floated in behind them, her glittering dress making her look like she belonged on a red carpet. And then there was me. The moment I stepped in, I felt their eyes. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin smile, the kind that wasn't a smile at all. Victoria gave me a once-over, her eyes lingering on my gown before she leaned into her mother and whispered something that made them both chuckle. I clenched my jaw but kept my composure. Tonight wasn't about reacting. Tonight was about patience. The dinner began, course after course of fine dining, each one accompanied by subtle digs. Emma, Victoria said sweetly across the table, what exactly do you do again? I can never keep track. Before I could answer, Margaret added, oh, darling, she works, what is it again? Something with paperwork, I think. Laughter rippled down the table. My fork covered midair, but I forced a smile. Actually, I design buildings, I said calmly. But paperwork is part of it too. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Well, I suppose someone has to do those jobs. The table chuckled again, and I felt the sting in my chest. But instead of shrinking, I smiled to myself. Let them laugh now. After dessert, Margaret rose for a toast. She tapped her glass and beamed at her guests. Thank you all for coming to celebrate our 35th wedding anniversary. Richard and I couldn't be prouder of our family, our legacy. Everything we've built, everything we've achieved, has been for them. She glanced at Daniel, then at Victoria, her gaze conveniently skipping over me. The message was clear, I wasn't part of that legacy. When she sat down, I caught Daniel's eye. He squeezed my hand, and I knew this was my moment. I stood, my chair scraping lightly against the polished floor. All eyes turned to me, and for the first time in years, I didn't shrink under their stares. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. Excuse me, I said softly, raising my glass. I'd like to say something too. The room went silent. Margaret's smile froze on her face, brittle and thin. Victoria rolled her eyes. I want to thank Margaret and Richard for hosting such a beautiful evening, I began, my tone calm but firm. And since this is a celebration of family and legacy, I thought it might be the right time to share some news of my own. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small stack of glossy brochures, the ones my firm had printed for the groundbreaking of the community center. I handed them down the table, one by one, until nearly every guest was holding one. The silence was deafening as I scanned the front cover, my name printed in bold letters under the title Lead Architect, Emma Thompson. Margaret's face drained of color. Victoria's jaw dropped. Richard actually leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't quite believe what he was reading. I've been working on this project for over a year, I continued. Next week, we'll be breaking ground on a community center that will provide after-school programs, job training, and health services for families across the city. It's the biggest project of my career, and I couldn't be more proud. The room erupted in murmurs. Daniel's colleagues smiled, raising their glasses toward me. A few of Richard's business associates even clapped lightly. And me? I stood tall, my smile calm and unshakable. For the first time, they weren't laughing. The silence that followed my announcement was one of the sweetest moments of my life. For years I had endured Margaret's sharp tongue, Victoria's cutting remarks, Richard's cold disdain. But now, their expressions told me everything I needed to know. This was a blow they hadn't seen coming. Victoria was the first to recover. She gave a little laugh, brittle and forced. Well, isn't that cute? A community center. How charitable of you. Her words were meant to sting, but I smiled. It's not charity, Victoria. It's work. And it's recognition. The city trusted me with something huge, and I intend to make them proud. The murmurs around the table grew louder. Some guests leaned toward me with curious smiles, others whispered to each other, clearly impressed. I even caught one of Richard's longtime business partners giving me a respectful nod. But Margaret, oh, Margaret looked like someone had knocked the wind out of her. Her hand gripped the stem of her wine glass so tightly, I thought it might snap. Richard cleared his throat, clearly desperate to regain control of the evening. Well, he said gruffly, that's commendable, I suppose. But architecture is hardly what, Richard? Daniel cut in, his voice sharp. Hardly good enough? Because it sounds to me like my wife just accomplished something most people in this room couldn't dream of. The room went dead silent again. Daniel rarely raised his voice, but now he was defending me with a fierceness that made my heart swell. Margaret opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but I beat her to it. Calm, steady, and with just the right amount of bite. You've all made it clear what you think of me, I said, my gaze sweeping across the table. That I wasn't born into money. That I didn't come with the kind of name or background you deem worthy. But here's the truth, your son married me because I am worthy. Not because of what I inherited, but because of who I am and what I've built. A ripple went through the guests. Some shifted uncomfortably, others looked downright inspired. And if that's still not enough for you, I added, my voice firm but calm, then maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is the way you measure worth. That line it landed. Hard. Margaret's mouth snapped shut. Victoria looked like she wanted to vanish under the tablecloth. And Richard? For once, he didn't have a quick response. Daniel squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with pride. I couldn't have said it better myself, he murmured. From that point on, the atmosphere of the party shifted. Guests began asking me about the project, genuinely curious about the design, the impact it would have on the community. Even those who had ignored me at past gatherings leaned closer now, eager to know more. I answered graciously, but I didn't miss the looks on Margaret and Victoria's faces, the way their smug superiority melted into something else. Something that looked a lot like humiliation. When the night finally wound down, Daniel and I slipped into our coats and said our goodbyes. Margaret offered me a stiff hug, her words clipped congratulations. I suppose. I smiled sweetly. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that. Victoria didn't even try. She muttered something about being tired and swept past us, her heels clicking angrily on the polished floor. But Richard? He surprised me. He extended his hand, his face unreadable. You've clearly accomplished more than I realized, he said quietly. Perhaps I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest I would ever get from him. And honestly, that was enough. Outside, the cool night air filled my lungs, crisp and refreshing. Daniel wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. You were incredible in there, he said. I've never been prouder of you. I leaned my head against his shoulder, my smile soft but triumphant. For the first time in years, I felt seen not just by Daniel, but by everyone who had doubted me. And the sweetest part? I hadn't needed to raise my voice or lower myself to their level. I had silenced them with nothing but the truth. From that night on, things shifted. Margaret and Victoria still weren't warm to me, but they were quieter. The snide remarks disappeared, the dismissive looks stopped, and every now and then I even caught Margaret watching me with something I never thought I'd see in her eyes: respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And me? I no longer cared whether they liked me or not, because I finally realized I didn't need their approval to prove my worth. I had already done that myself. Before I close this chapter, let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you weren't good enough, only to prove everyone wrong in the end? If so, share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their worth isn't defined by anyone else's opinion. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be.